In the Netherlands, 900 citizens concerned about climate change sued their own government and won. In Ecuador, 30,000 natives and small farmers sued mighty Chevron for billions of dollars and won. In the Philippines, one feisty lawyer sued the government over logging in old-growth forests and won. In Argentina, 70 residents of a riverside slum sued 3 governments and 44 corporations over the reeking sewer called the Riachuelo River and won. But in North America, when government and industry conspire to foul the air and water, citizens can't sue on their own behalf. People here are not legally entitled to fresh air and clean water, to a healthy environment. Why not? And would it make a difference? Let's travel around the world and find out. I'm Silver Donald Cameron, and I'm a lucky man. A few years ago, my buddy Chris Beckett and I set out to create a subscription website called thegreeninterview.com. We joked that we were the Ophias group. Well, the Green Interview Project gave us the opportunity to travel the world filming fascinating conversations with inspiring environmental leaders, some of them famous, some of them not. We learned a lot, and one thing that really stood out is this. In most countries, people have a legal right to fresh air, clean water, and healthy food. But not in Canada, and not in the United States. Why not? The legal right to a healthy environment makes such a difference. When people have those rights, they use them, and they can win big battles. In Argentina, for example. Buenos Aires, Argentina, is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's often called the Paris of South America. But for hundreds of years, Buenos Aires has had a dirty little secret. This river is the Riachuelo, and it forms the boundary between the city of Buenos Aires on this side and the province of Buenos Aires over there. The Matanza Riachuelo basin is 80 kilometers long, and it's home to nearly 5 million people. For more than 200 years, it has been horribly polluted, carrying the runoff from tanneries, oil refineries, chemical industries, shanty towns, and farmlands. As the new millennium began, its surface was matted with debris, and the river was littered with 53 abandoned ships, not to mention old cars, bathtubs, dead horses, and other stuff you don't want to know about. Then, in 2004, a little band of residents from an impoverished riverside neighborhood brought a lawsuit against the city and the province and the national government, and 14 upstream municipalities and 44 private companies, alleging that these organizations had damaged their health and infringed their right to a healthy environment. And the Supreme Court of Argentina agreed to hear what's become known as the Mendoza case. The lead attorney in the Mendoza case was Daniel Salaberry, who was offended that the human right to clean air and fresh water, which is guaranteed in the Constitution of Argentina, wasn't being honored in practice.
The big problem in a country like Argentina is the effectiveness of law. The law can be declared in the Constitution, but if it is not properly practiced, it's dead letter.
The Mendoza case was rooted in an initiative by the Ombudsman's Office, which brought together people representing the neighborhoods, the private sector, civil society, environmentalists, and the University of Buenos Aires. When the case went to trial, the court adopted a procedure that gave all of those people a chance to be heard.
Basically, they put together a procedure very unique. Unique for the court, unique for the tribunals in general in Argentina for justice, that was based on public hearings. Public hearings are very new and powerful mechanisms for giving visibility.
Leandro Garcia Silva is with the Argentinian Ombudsman's Office.
So they confront in a public theater, let's say, the government, the enterprises, the affected people, and ask questions, and they said, we don't have to prove pollution, that's obvious. What we have to do is to think in how to address the problem for the future. The government was asked to refine their proposal. That proposal was confronted in public hearings with the opinion of several actors. The court asked the University of Buenos Aires to put together a group to analyze this proposal, and finally made a decision based in part in diagnosis the Ombudsman made, in the proposal of the government, in the opinions they gathered during these hearings.
Marina Aizan is a prominent Argentinian journalist who's written a book, Contaminados, on the Mendoza case.
It was a long trial, of course, and during the trial, all the companies would say, it's not me who is polluting this river. To the point that one judge said, oh, I guess the Riachuelo is polluting itself because nobody was to blame, really. So it took 2 years for the court to reach a decision, unanimous decision. And it was historical in many senses.
On July 8, 2008, after 4 years of hearings and investigation, the Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision not just for Argentina, but for the world. In a judgment that one observer called sweeping and poetic, the court ruled that government and industry had indeed infringed the residents' right to a healthy environment and were obliged to repair the damage. Again, though, implementing the ruling was a real challenge.
There was not a lot of confidence that the public agencies had the capacity to carry out the cleanup. So they made a plan called the Comprehensive Plan for Environmental Remediation, and they established benchmarks to monitor the progress of fulfilling the requirements of the plan.
The responsibility for the cleanup fell to a new multi-jurisdictional organization called ACUMAR. ACUMAR's task was to remove the industrial pollution, clean up the landfills, provide potable water to the residents, install proper sewage systems and storm drainage, create an emergency health plan, move the riverbank residents into proper social housing, and keep the public informed about its progress. The work was to be supervised by a citizens group and by a judge to whom ACUMAR would make regular reports, with penalties to be imposed for delays.
As it turned out, the targets were not met. The supervising judge in charge of monitoring the implementation of the plan has been charged with corruption, along with public officials and the companies handling the cleanup.
But the cleanup did go forward all the same. In one recent year, Argentina spent more than $1 billion on this one river basin. Here's a very revealing fact. The Riachuelo is now monitored by 250 environmental inspectors. That's more inspectors than Environment Canada has for our entire country. Antolin Magellanes is head of ACUMAR. I asked him what success would look like.
When the people can say they are proud and happy to live here.
What does the river look like after 8 years? The Riachuelo is far from clean, but it's a long way from what it was. Landfills have been cleaned up. Most of the junk is out of the river. 200 families have been moved into new housing, and where their shanties once stood, a linear riverbank park planted with native trees is giving the river back to the city and its citizens. There's a lot left to do, and some tough questions remain unanswered. For example, the disposal of the toxic sediments at the river bottom. This is still a dirty urban river, but it gets a little cleaner every day. And as an example of what can be done, it has shifted the thinking of communities across the country and around the world. After our visit to Argentina, the Supreme Court made some more bold judgments, like ordering an orangutan moved from a zoo to a nature preserve because it was a sentient creature with an inherent right to freedom. The court also made some disappointing judgments, like ordering the Mendoza plaintiffs to pay legal costs. But overall, this is a heartening story, and it's rooted in one crucial fact, that the Constitution of Argentina guarantees to all citizens the right to breathe clean air, drink pure water, and eat healthy foods. That's why the Ombudsman was involved. The Ombudsman is the guardian of human rights. But not all countries recognize that there is a human right to fresh air and water, a right to a healthy environment.
Walked everywhere they went and sailed on the wind. It wasn't even that long ago. Some still remember when you could drink the rivers and eat from every shore. Well, the tides come and go, they don't do that no more.
Here, in our own community of Nova Scotia, the Northern Pulp Mill has for half a century spewed toxic effluent into the middle of the Pictou Landing First Nation. Aseg, in the Mi'kmaq language, the other room, is a small estuary that always provided the native people with food, recreation, and shelter for boats, which is why Aseg became known as Boat Harbor in English. In 1967, the provincial government converted Aseg into a waste lagoon for the pulp mill. They promised Pictou Landing's people that they would still be able to use it for fishing and swimming. Well, this is Aseg today, a witch's brew of heavy metals and chemical wastes. Pictou Landing resident Jonathan Beater.
It's hurt a lot of people in the community, and I don't just say mentally, physically. You know, a lot of people's health has diminished over the years just to long-term exposure. And so for a lot of us in our community, we felt the fact that the issue of health was not being tended to, then we kind of felt betrayed.
Aseg receives 77 million liters of effluent every single day. The effluent ultimately flows into the Northumberland Strait. The Sobey family's group of companies is headquartered in Pictou County. Paul Sobey lives 4 or 5 kilometers down the shore.
As a kid, I remember the whole area had a lot of sea urchins, and you go down Montgomery Beach or in front of our place just on Chance Harbor off the coast here, and it was all full of sand dollars. Well, they're all gone now. They finally admitted that there was dioxins and furans and cadmium and all these other heavy metals in Boat Harbor. So there's no doubt that that's also flowing out into the strait.
When we walked into Aseg, we heard not a single bird call, and only one on the way out. Governments have often promised that Aseg would be cleaned up. In early 2015, the present provincial government pledged it again. But the negotiations take place between the company and the government, and sometimes the Pictou Landing First Nation. Unlike the impoverished citizens of Buenos Aires, the Nova Scotians directly affected, like Jonathan Beadle and Paul Sobey, don't have a right to be heard. And nobody speaks for Aseg. Few people see Osseg tucked away on the east side of Pictou Harbor, but nothing can hide the reeking smog that regularly rolls across the harbor into the historic town of Pictou.
25 years ago, it was acceptable. And the old timers say, yes, the smell of money. Well, you know what? It's no longer the smell of money. It's the kiss of death, because there are so many medical concerns and it's affecting the way people live their lives.
Anne Emmett owns a small inn in Pictou. What's the most important thing for people to understand about the town's air quality?
I think they need to understand the effect it is having on local business. Not just tourism business, but any business at all. All you have to do is drive down the main street and look at all the empty storefronts, the boarded up storefronts.
Matt Gunning, a Pictou businessman, heads up the 5,000-member Facebook page called Clean Up the Pictou County Pulp Mill.
In 2012, Northern Pulp admitted that they released 1,011 tons of particulate matter 2.5. The federal threshold for reporting is 0.3 tons. So we looked at that and said, well, that's a lot. And you know, that's 336,900% over the reporting threshold.
Its design is you know, around 450 to 500 wet tons per day. They're producing up to 1,000. So it's double the capacity, and the plant's not designed for it. And you can see that through the effluent.
The mill's air pollution equipment hasn't worked properly for most of a decade. In 2015, the provincial government issued an industrial approval that required the mill to make significant improvements both to its air and its water emissions. The company appealed to the courts, and the government ultimately settled for much less than it had originally asked for.
They used to camp there with their kids. They'd play in the water. The landing had a fishing fleet. She was good as any other. They'd swim out to Pine Island, boil fresh dug clams on shore. Then the big mill started going. They don't do that no more. They don't do that no more. They don't do that no more. There's poison on the harbor floor. They don't do that no more. They don't do that no more. They don't do that no more.
Here's musician Dave Gunning, Matt's brother, who wrote and performed the song you just heard.
Essentially, Northern Pulp has been playing chicken with the government and winning every time. They don't have to improve their effluent quality or water consumption amounts, but at the end of the day, the government just totally caved and gave everything to the mill that they were asking for. All we've been asking for is if we could bring this mill within the same compliance standards being met by every other pulp mill in Canada. And according to the third-party results, it's the worst of the worst in the country. So they're just cowering to the bully.
Its critics find it particularly galling that this company has received enormous amounts of money from the taxpayers.
When you hear them talking about putting $150 million in the mill, just remember where it really came from. So the mill, Northern Pulp, says we invested, and the we is the people of Nova Scotia who are doing the loans and grants. And it is a horrific problem here in this community. And what's different this time, I think it's more support from the broad-based community. And we're not allowing, whether it be the First Nations or the community at large, they're all talking the same thing. They're not allowing this divide and conquer.
But once again, the voices that count belong not to the affected citizens, not even to coalitions of affected citizens, but to government and industry. 4,000 kilometers to the west, on the Pacific coast of Canada, Alexander Morton has spent the last 30 years defending wild salmon against the impact of open net pen salmon farms full of Atlantic salmon.
They began in 1987. And for a few years, we didn't think there was a problem with it. We didn't ever ask the industry to go away. We just asked them not to displace us and to stay off the major migration routes and don't go on top of the prime fishing grounds. But they did. They went right into the vital organs of that archipelago and displaced my neighbors, displaced the whales. Then there was toxic algae blooms. Then there was Atlantic salmon in these Pacific rivers. Then there was disease problems.
Similar problems have plagued the industry on the Atlantic coast as well, and the whole industry is propped up by tax money and supported by government. Alex Morton didn't know that.
I kept writing letters to the government, and I was convinced for a good decade that if I could just line my words up in the right order, they would understand this was a problem and just come in and fix it. Because in working with killer whales with the government, they were wonderful. The killer whale scientists were fantastic. So I expected the same thing when it came to salmon. But they kept saying to me, "Dear Ms. Morton, there is no evidence of toxic algae blooms, the whales being displaced, Atlantics being a problem." And it took me that long, a decade, to see that word "no evidence," those two words. Finally I was like, okay, they're not saying there's no problem. They're just saying there's no evidence. So okay, I'll just roll up my sleeves and I'm a biologist, I'll go get the evidence.
But even scientific evidence doesn't mean much to governments that think their duty is to serve industry. Eventually, Alex Morton and her allies did persuade the federal government to commission a judicial inquiry headed by Justice Bruce Cohen. After 3 years and $26 million, Justice Cohen handed down an admirable report. On the East Coast, 2 professors from the Dalhousie University Law School did a similar study for the government of Nova Scotia. And the net result of all this hard, honest work was essentially nothing.
I mean, what I see in my community was that we, as humans that wanted to survive, had no right.
You had no right. You have to persuade government with an economic argument. Just the same as the people in Pictou, a whole continent away. And it's no different in the United States. Barrington, New Hampshire is a pretty town of 8,500 people in rural New England. Just off the road, in a lovely residential neighborhood, is a large piece of land that includes a disused gravel pit that was closed by court order many years ago. But in 2005, the town changed the rules. Gravel quarries in residential areas were now permitted as of right. So the gravel pit could reopen, and its operation would knock about 30% off the value of all the adjacent homes. Jim Connolly is an artist who lives directly across the road on the idyllic Isinglass River.
This gravel pit will be permitted to do 60 trips a day, and that will be about, depending on how they run their day, 6 to 8. Every 6 to 8 minutes, a 100-ton hauler going by everybody's front door. So I would say the market value of the house is seriously impacted. I can't imagine any broker or any person, why would they ever want to live on a street where every 8 minutes there's a 100-ton hauler going by you?
But it was perfectly legal. So Jim Connolly went looking for help and found the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, headed by Thomas Lindsay and Mary Margill. He soon learned that the situation in Barrington was not unique. SELDF has done a lot of research on the ability of a community to say no to corporate development. To begin with, municipalities are forbidden to adopt legislation that conflicts with state or provincial laws, and those laws are designed to facilitate commerce and industry. Thomas Lindsay.
It's basically put communities in a box where they have these legal doctrines on each side of the box that if they attempt to say no, say fracking's coming into your community, if they attempt to say no to fracking coming in, that the corporation that's affected by that frack project actually has recourse to a system of law that allows them to punish the municipality for even attempting to say no.
When I came to find out that state law preempted local law and how little protection the actual individual homeowner has against corporate America, it made me absolutely furious. Furious that you can't say no to something that could take place in your community, jeopardize your health, jeopardize the value of your home, while somebody else profits.
The system, say Lindsay and Margill, actually makes sustainability and democracy illegal.
If you can't stop fracking, you can't say yes to a sustainable energy future, because if you can't stop the bad things from coming in that are interfering with your vision of what sustainability should be, then you're in a position where you can't define the future of your community. The system has nothing to do with environmental protection. It has to do with something different, which is about legalizing harms. That's what the permit system is about.
It's not enough for us to try to regulate bad things a little bit better. That still leads to ecosystem destruction. It may delay it a little bit, but it still means we're getting fracked and we're getting factory farmed and so on. Communities are beginning to see the reframing that this isn't just, we don't have a fracking problem, we have a democracy problem. We don't have a factory farm problem, we have a democracy problem.
Most Americans, most Canadians too, find this hard to believe. So when CELDF gets involved with the community, its work starts with education.
We teach something called democracy schools, these weekend trainings that communities host.
That's what was going on in Barrington the weekend we were there.
We've held over close to 300 now across the United States, and we've had some in Canada as well, in which we look at these past movements and how have people really driven fundamental change. How did the abolitionists end slavery and recognize rights of the freed slaves? How did the women's rights movement, which built up in the 1800s, how did they ultimately drive amendments to the U.S. Constitution? That all built up from the grassroots.
And if the community decides to take action?
What the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund will do is work with them on that process, which means helping them to draft a local community bill of rights for the municipality, help them to navigate what that structure of lawmaking looks like, that systemic change, the need for that change, that has to be a community-wide education effort. And so we help folks move along that pathway, beginning with educating themselves, then educating a broader swath of the community, help them to draft a local law.
That local law, the Community Bill of Rights, takes many forms, but its core is the assertion of the right of the community to govern and regulate its affairs democratically, and to strip corporations of the power to deny the rights of citizens within their own communities. The Community Bill of Rights is all part of a larger plan.
The plan is a grassroots revolt, a community revolt, that begins to redefine communities as not just the people who live there, but also nature and ecosystems within those communities. And then builds a structure of law that actually elevates those rights above the rights of corporations and commerce. I mean, it's pretty simple when you lay it out on paper. It's just the fact that most people believe they live in a system that they don't live in.
Just ask Jim Connolly about the system he lives in.
It's not justice. It's not democracy, and it's not the state or local municipality looking out for the welfare of their citizens.
What all these stories have in common is that individual citizens don't have the right to protect themselves, no matter how wealthy or influential they may be. Individuals without rights, which in North America is all of us, are helpless. All we can do is plead with the provincial or state government to take action. Let's find out a little more about the rights that Canadians and Americans don't have. This is Dr. David Boyd, the Canadian legal scholar who literally wrote the book on the recent and rapid spread of environmental rights around the world.
The Stockholm Declaration was the first formal statement that people have a right to live in a healthy environment and a corresponding responsibility to protect the environment. And since that 1972 declaration, which wasn't a legally binding treaty or didn't have any enforceable provisions, but it's had a transformative impact on both environmental law and constitutional law around the world. So it really was a watershed moment in bringing together for the first time really the concept of environmental protection on the one hand and human rights on the other.
40-odd years later, more than 90% of the nations of the world have incorporated environmental rights into their legal systems, usually in their constitutions. And that includes recognizing the legal rights of people who aren't even born yet. Antonio Oposa Jr. in the Philippines has had a string of remarkable legal victories. Oposa says that he uses the law to tell stories.
The nice thing about the legal action are four things. One is that it tells a story in a manner that is organized, orderly, logical, and backed up by evidence. Number two is that it brings the issue on the table of discussion. In a legal action, the person you would like to listen to your story will have to listen to that story. And number three, it spurs action. And number four, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years, it may take forever, but there is going to be a resolution.
The case that made Oposa's reputation was a petition to the Supreme Court on behalf of future generations to ban logging in the country's vanishing old-growth forests.
It told the story of how there was only 800,000 hectares left of virgin forest in the Philippines. The government granted logging concessions to more than 4 million hectares, and we were cutting down at the rate of 120,000 hectares per year. And the story is the children who were the plaintiffs, the petitioners, in the next 5, 7, 8 years, they would not have any forest left.
The trial court ruled against him. Unborn children can't sue because they don't have legal personality. Oposa laughed and appealed, and that brought the story back into the limelight. In the end, the Supreme Court agreed with him and banned logging in all the old-growth forests in the country. That case established the principle of intergenerational equity, the duty of the present generation to preserve a healthy environment for future generations. That principle is now called the Oposa Doctrine, and is used in courtrooms around the world. Cliff Villa of the University of New Mexico Law School.
Since that case was decided by the Philippine Supreme Court in 1993, there have been a lot of people who've been really inspired to keep going, to really bring litigation to establish this principle of intergenerational responsibility. So he's not only established his own case, but he's established a precedent and inspiration for a new generation of lawyers to try that same kind of idea around the world.
Oposa doesn't stop with courtroom victories. He teams up with the police to enforce the law as well. He confronts and arrests illegal loggers, poachers, and smugglers. At one point, his closest friend and associate was shot dead, and Oposa himself had a 1 million peso price on his head.
There's not too many lawyers who would actually put themselves on a boat or engage personally in a raid, and he certainly probably put himself at some risk as well, but it really is indicative of the depth of his dedication to environmental protection.
In 1999, acting for residents of Manila Bay, Oposa filed a second major legal action, suing 10 government agencies for infringing the citizens' right to a healthy environment by failing in their duty to protect the bay.
Manila Bay, which is a historic place and which is known as the center of marine biodiversity on Earth. I've seen it just deteriorate to such a degree. Metro Manila alone was dumping 4 million gallons or 16 million liters of raw and untreated sewage every day into Manila Bay. So what is that? It's not just pollution, it is abusing the crown jewel of the Philippines' marine biodiversity.
Some of the hearings were held in a boat on the bay, and Oposa won the case, though it took 9 years. Nearly a decade later, Manila Bay, like the Riachuelo River, is still far from pristine, but it's much improved. The fish are back, and the bay gets cleaner every day. Tony Oposa is now campaigning for a radical transformation of all the country's highways.
My demand on that petition is divide all the roads by half. Half for non-motorized transportation, meaning walking, cycling, and even make a vegetable garden, and then half for motor vehicle transportation. Collective, preferably collective transportation.
And how would he divide the highways? Right down the center line. With cleaner air and more people walking, public health would improve. So would social life, and the impact on greenhouse gas emissions would be dramatic.
This transportation system, if you took in all the carbon footprint of the life cycle of a car, the carbon footprint of that is about half of all the climate gases, climate-forcing gases.
Looking back on his life, Oposa sees his work in three parts, like a trilogy.
One is land, which is the forest. Two is the waters, which is the Visayan Sea work and the Manila Bay work. And now is the air, the atmosphere. Because this is not about sharing the road. This is not about sharing, improving means of transportation. It is about changing the mindset that is causing the emission.
And the three acts of his life's work echo the three basic elements of life.
The environment is not about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. It is about life and the sources of life, of land, air, and water. Easy to remember, LAW. If you don't have air for 3 minutes, we die. If we don't have water for 3 days, we die. If we don't have food for 30 days, we die.
Land, air, water, the law of life itself. This is the tropical rainforest of eastern Ecuador, in the headwaters of the Amazon River. And this is the scene of one of the greatest environmental crimes of the 20th century, which has given rise to the greatest environmental lawsuit of the 21st century. This is an open pool of waste oil, one of 1,000 or so scattered over the 2 million hectares of forest where Texaco, now part of Chevron, produced oil in the 1970s and 1980s. This is a sample of the stinking contaminated water that Texaco simply pumped into the streams. And this is Pablo Fajardo, a young Aboriginal lawyer from Lago Agrio, the center of the oil industry in eastern Ecuador. When he was growing up nearby, the streams that provided the family's drinking water were covered with oil slicks, and the rain sometimes fell black from the soot of the gas flares.
Everywhere you went, there were hundreds of open wells, pools of crude oil, animals fallen into the open wells, gas combustion, creating an enormous curtain of smoke. It was a catastrophic landscape.
Pablo Fajardo grew up here in extreme poverty, but with help from friends in the Catholic Church, he put himself through law school. His very first case as a lawyer was the one known throughout South America as Chevron Toxico, a $27 billion action on behalf of Los Afectados, the thousands of indigenous people and settlers affected by the pollution. A lot of money, and yet it would only cover the superficial damage.
I believe that Chevron's worst crimes are irreparable. For example, the loss of indigenous cultures. According to our research, in the first 5 years of Texaco's operations, 2 separate indigenous groups went extinct. There's no amount of money that can bring back those 2 cultures. Second, according to data from public health surveys, in recent years, at least 2,000 people died of cancers that could be attributed to toxins in the environment. This is human life. People who died. There is no way that they can be brought back with any amount of money. And when someone dies, suppose it's a woman, it's not just the victim. It's her children and her husband and the whole community that suffer the consequences. This pain can also not be addressed with all the money in the world. And the third thing is nature. Ruined rivers, animals, forest, everything that was destroyed is all impossible to restore.
But much of the damage can be repaired, and after 20 years of bitter litigation in both the United States and Ecuador, Fajardo and his colleagues won a $9.5 billion judgment in the Supreme Court of Ecuador. By then, though, Chevron had pulled all its assets out of the country. So Fajardo's team asked the courts of other countries, including Canada, to enforce the Ecuadorian judgment by seizing Chevron assets in those countries. In 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the case could indeed be heard in the Canadian courts, and another long round of litigation began. But hey, how ironic is that? Ecuadorians suing for the enforcement of their environmental rights in a country that doesn't even recognize the environmental rights of its own citizens.
For the native peoples who have always lived in the Amazon basin, it's not just their land, it's their supermarket, their pharmacy, their home, the place where they exist in absolute freedom. They lived from and took from the forest only what they needed because they didn't want more. They had everything. They had their entire lives. Of course, they had freedom, total freedom. Whenever one talks to the elders or any of the native peoples, whether Sequoia, Kofan, they say that is the most serious thing that the oil industry took from them.
Chevron, of course, denies its liability. It handed over its operations to the state oil company Petroecuador in 1992 and did what it claims was an adequate cleanup in 1994. It portrays itself as the victim of predatory lawyers pursuing a fraudulent case. Its fierce attacks on Stephen Donziger, Fajardo's American colleague, culminated in a U.S. legal action that found Donziger guilty of racketeering. Donziger, of course, is appealing. In this endlessly complex case, accusations of corruption are a constant theme, and everyone always appeals everything. Donziger says that delay is Chevron's basic policy.
Their primary strategy is that the case never ends. They don't want to pay for a cleanup. They did everything they possibly could to sabotage, our efforts to present proof, to manipulate evidence, to deceive the court, drown the court in frivolous motions. There were just thousands and thousands of repetitive motions they filed.
There is a much darker side to this conflict, too. Pablo Fajardo has won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize for his work on the Chevron Toxico case, but his life has been threatened repeatedly, and his brother has been murdered. In Lago Agrio, murder is commonplace, and the killers are rarely found. Pablo has been fighting this battle since he was a teenager, and he will probably be at it for the rest of his life. Where does he find the strength to carry on?
I live here. I live here. This is my home. I could leave, take my children, and go somewhere else. But what happens to the rest of the people who live here? What happens to the indigenous people who have been here all their lives? I try to do my duty to the extent possible by respecting nature, people, and life so that there is justice. I don't know if I'm brave or cowardly, but I do what I must.
Sooner or later, the various suits and countersuits, claims and counterclaims will work their slow way through the courts. But it's already evident that there have been two great losers in this situation. The first is the peoples of this region, who were entitled to expect some benefits from this alleged development. The second is Mother Nature herself, who has suffered a massive insult here. Whatever the outcome of the lawsuits, this cannot be right. What's also clear is that a little band of crusaders armed with passion and law can fight one of the biggest corporations on earth at least to a draw and perhaps to a victory. In Europe, another little band of crusaders took on their national government over the biggest issue of all, climate change. Roger Cox is a Dutch lawyer in private practice here in the city of Maastricht. In 2006, he watched Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth. He was horrified at what he learned. With his law partners, he acquired the Dutch distribution rights to the film and organized free screenings all over the Netherlands. Like many others, he had high hopes for the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit in 2009.
And then Copenhagen failed. So this much anticipated summit failed. And it became clear that nation states were, at this point in time, not yet up to the task to keep us below 2 degrees and take the reduction measures and mitigation measures that are necessary for that. And then I thought, well, you know, let's see if there is a way that we can use the law in pressuring governments into more climate action, because you will need nation states to take a coordinate and leading role in transforming our energy systems and transforming society. I think without them and without their lead and coordination, such a transformation is almost impossible. And that's when I started thinking about writing a book.
The book was Revolution Justified: Why Only the Law Can Save Us Now. In it, Cox argued that the climate change crisis requires that we take strong and unpopular action in the short term to prevent great harm in the medium and long term. But corporations and governments are obsessed with the short term, the next election, the next quarterly report. All the same, governments do have a fundamental legal duty to care for their citizens. Could the courts force government to do its duty in protecting citizens from the disastrous effects of climate change?
And the only way to get them involved is to find a way to bring a suit to court. And that's basically when I started to think of how could we get the legal system and the judiciary involved.
Cox's book had captured the attention of Marianne Manesma, the founder and director of a bold and innovative organization called the Urgenda Foundation, which became the plaintiff when Roger Cox and his colleagues actually did sue the government. At that point, Marianne invented something she calls crowd pleading.
I thought it should not be an organization against the state, but it should be of the Dutch citizens. So I asked people, do you know of any court case anywhere in the world that could be helpful for us? Please think with us. And you could be the co-plaintiff in our case. And any co-plaintiff can be added, and we pay for it, so you don't have to pay. But it would be nice to go into court with a lot of citizens.
In the end, more than 900 citizens joined Urgenda as co-plaintiffs.
And they went every step along the way with us. So even if we only handed in a bunch of papers for the courts, they just went with us, and we together handed in the bunch of papers with children and a lot of fuss around it. So we had a very large group, and I think it's important that the government sees that it's not only Urgenda that wants this. No, it's a large part of society that is anxious to have a change and that is afraid of what's going to happen if we don't make the change.
Surprisingly, one thing that was not an issue in court was the reality of climate change.
Courts are maybe the best organizations in place that we have within society to look at evidence, because that's what courts do, they look at evidence. So I always said, let's bring the climate science to court. And the Dutch state didn't even try to deny that science and accepted that science fully and completely.
Urgenda and the citizens asked the court to make 2 rulings.
First, you ask for a declaration that current climate policies by, in this case, the Dutch nation state are inadequate and therefore also unlawful. And asked the court to label them as hazardous negligence and as a violation of the state duty of care. So that would be the first request. And then secondly, we requested to impose a duty on the state to start reducing greenhouse gas emissions in a rate that is consistent with what is necessary based on science.
Marianne Manesma says their message to the government was very clear.
You have acknowledged that all industrial countries should do between 25 and 40% CO2 reductions in 2020, but you're only heading for 16, and you might not even make the 16% because we're not really doing very well.
We knew that it could become a historic moment if the court would rule in our favor, and once it became clear that the court would rule in our favor, that obviously stirred the emotions quite a bit with all involved, including myself. Yeah.
The court directed the government to make a reduction of at least 25% by 2020, and the government is doing that even while it's appealing the case.
The main thing is that it's about a dangerous situation, an extremely dangerous situation, that is actually acknowledged by the Dutch government. So it's not something about that we ask for money, or that's why we also called it a court case out of love, because we just want to change. We don't want the money, we want new policies to still have a future for our children.
Urgenda had posted its documents and arguments on the web in English as well as in Dutch, and the judge also handed down his ruling in both languages. So, when Urgenda won, it turned out not only to be a court case out of love, but a court case full of hope as well.
When we won, within half an hour it was all over the world. We received thousands of phone calls, emails, letters. It gave people hope to continue, because they thought finally there's a judge that sees that this is a real big problem, and if this is one judge, there might be more.
Since the Urgenda case, a farmer in Pakistan and a group of young people in Washington state have successfully sued their governments for failing to act on climate change. Similar suits are before the courts in Oregon, Belgium, and Norway, and before the federal courts in the United States. The Urgenda victory was truly an historic event. So, fellow Canadians, brothers and sisters in the United States, the right to a healthy environment is acknowledged all over the world as a fundamental human right. How do we get it recognized in North America? Well, all over the continent, people are finding new ways to assert that right. The Aamjiwnaang First Nation is located in the heart of Ontario's notorious Chemical Valley, which pumps out more air pollution than some entire provinces. Completely surrounded by petrochemical industries that give it the worst air in Canada, Aamjiwnaang suffers from really alarming health problems, including high levels of leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, asthma, and miscarried pregnancies. In addition, far more girls than boys are born in Aamjiwnaang. That's happening elsewhere, too.
After our study came out, there was some people from Asia who did a study of the Asian countries, and then they did a study of the North American countries, and then a guy from Greenland did a study around the Arctic Circle. And what they found is throughout the world this is happening, but nowhere near to our extent. It's been called the first step to extinction.
That's Ron Plain, one of two Aamjiwnaang band members who in 2010 filed a trailblazing lawsuit. The suit alleged that Aamjiwnaang's charter rights to life, liberty, and security of the person were violated when the Ontario government continued to approve the expansion of these toxic industries. Ron Plain and Ada Lockridge contend that the right to life, which is guaranteed in Canada's Charter of Rights, logically includes, well, the right to breathe. That would mean that Canadians already do have environmental rights. It will take a Supreme Court ruling to confirm that, but Aamjiwnaang had a pretty powerful case.
The World Health Organization said this is the most contaminated airshed, which has never been used in the term. It's only been a watershed, never called an airshed. This is the most contaminated airshed in Canada. And they measured that off particulate fine and ultra. So that's pretty nasty.
Ron and Ada were represented by EcoJustice, Canada's only national environmental law charity. Their case was in the courts for years. The stakes were high. If they won,
well, on the charter challenge, it will become an enshrined right that you are able to walk out your door and breathe air that isn't harmful to your health.
And to feel safe in my own home. Because when those plants get going, it'll shake my house, the windows rattle and stuff. And then you're grabbing the phone, oh my God, what's going on?
Aamjiwnaang is also a prime example of environmental racism, the nasty habits of governments and corporations citing polluting industries, toxic waste sites, and garbage dumps, cheek by jowl with poor, marginalized, non-white communities. What was Ada Lockridge hoping for?
Breathe clean air, feel safe in our own home, and to be treated equally as anybody else would.
But we're not asking for money.
No,
what we're asking for is cumulative effects be considered in every decision, as it says in the law it's supposed to be. And what we're expecting to happen out of that is the government's going to come back and say that we don't have a method of measuring cumulative effects. Then we'll propose methods. I mean, there's a couple of really big cases that are happening in Canada, and ours is one of them. And it will change the playing field.
In 2016, however, a new provincial minister announced regulatory changes that would give Aamjiwnaang much of what it needed. The changes meant better warnings and fuller information, and consideration in provincial decisions of the cumulative effects of all the pollution affecting the community. So the parties agreed to end the long-running litigation. Good news for Aamjiwnaang, but it meant the charter issue was never adjudicated. Remember Jim Connolly in Barrington, New Hampshire? In March 2016, after years of organizing, its town meeting voted to institute a community Bill of Rights, joining almost 200 local communities all over the United States. In states like Colorado and New Hampshire, communities are now joining together to assert their rights on a statewide scale. And David Suzuki, the Dean of Canadian Environmentalists, has organized a Canada-wide Blue Dot movement to engage Canadians in asserting their environmental rights on a municipal level. Blue Dot organizer Katie Perfit makes a presentation.
So here in Halifax, we have the chance to pass a municipal declaration, an aspirational piece we can continue to aspire to, that will connect us to a national movement and that will profile the amazing progress that's been made in Halifax over the years. It will begin a much-needed conversation about a provincial Bill of Rights in Nova Scotia, and in the big picture, the need for an amendment to the Canadian Charter to include the right to a healthy environment.
Why a charter amendment? David Boyd.
A constitutional right means that it's the highest or supreme law of the land. It enjoys the highest level of legal protection possible in these legal systems. And it's also something deeper and more profound. It's a reflection of society's most cherished and deeply held values. So it reflects a real emergence of consciousness over the past 4 decades. It's been a core concept in many Indigenous legal systems for millennia. So whether it's the Haida on Canada's west coast or the Mi'kmaq on Canada's east coast, environmental rights and responsibilities are a cornerstone of traditional Indigenous legal systems.
The real challenge is to look at our relationship with the earth. That's why I think any initiative to try to get people thinking about the right to a healthy environment, when you start thinking what is a healthy environment, you come up right away. Well, of course, our most fundamental needs to stay alive are clean air, clean water, clean soil that gives us our food, photosynthesis that gives us all of the energy in our bodies, and biodiversity. Those are the critical elements that keep us healthy and alive. So if you're talking about a healthy environment, you've got to talk about the protection of the air and the water. That's absolutely critical.
The Haida people taught Suzuki that even the distinction between humans and the environment is fundamentally a false one.
The First Nations have been my teacher now for 40 years. As environmentalists, we'd describe the problem the wrong way. We thought of it as the environment's out there, we're here, and we've got to manage our interaction or relationship with it with laws and regulations. But what the Haida were saying is, no, there is a connection so profound that there is no difference between the environment is who we are. Sever that, and we're no longer bound to a place. So it's that rootedness in place that really defines us. And when you think about it, you've now visited Vancouver for a few days, you've drunk the water, you've eaten the food, you've breathed the air. There's as much a part of Vancouver now is a part of your body, and you take that away with you.
Suzuki's Blue Dot initiative was very effective. In a year and a half, more than 125 municipalities passed declarations proclaiming the rights of their citizens to clean air and water, safe food, and a stable climate. And one of them was Halifax. If we are the environment, and the environment is us, then recognizing the human right to a healthy environment necessarily requires recognizing and respecting the rights of Mother Nature herself. Meet Polly Higgins, a British lawyer whose only real client is the earth. Her main goal is also the title of one of her books, Eradicating Ecocide. Ecocide is damage, destruction, or loss of ecosystems such that peaceful enjoyment of a territory by the inhabitants is severely diminished or lost. And that includes all the inhabitants, not just the human ones. Polly Higgins is out to make ecocide a new UN-recognized crime, just like genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity.
So what a law of ecocide does is it creates a legal duty of care to put the health and well-being, if you like, of people and planet first. So that's an overriding legal duty that comes first, and then profit can flow from that. And so what it does is it restricts, and in fact it prohibits dangerous industrial activity, but it enables industrial activity within a corporate context to move into innovation of a different kind, based on a first do no harm principle.
Polly Higgins proposed an ecocide law to the UN in 2010. The next step is formal sponsorship by a UN member state, and the idea is increasingly supported by world opinion.
Bolivia as a state is calling for crimes against the environment to now be recognized. The Pope, Archbishop Tutu are all speaking out about the moral duty of care and how there really should be climate liability in law.
If Polly Higgins succeeds, this is where cases of ecocide will be heard. The Urgenda climate case was heard here in this city, The Hague, in a district court. The government is taking the case to the Court of Appeal, and it may well wind up in the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, which is also here in The Hague. But the highest court in this city is the highest court in the world, and it's here in this building, the International Court of Justice, also known as the World Court. It's hard to imagine that the climate change issue won't somehow wind up in this court. And that would be entirely fitting. This building, called the Peace Palace, represents the aspirations of all the world's people for peace, for a global system of law that allows us to resolve human conflicts without violence. This could also be the place where humans finally make peace with nature herself, where the laws of humanity finally come into harmony with the laws of the living world that sustains us. In recent years, the movement to recognize the rights of Mother Earth herself has spread around the world. This is a meeting of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, held in Otavalo, Ecuador. Ecuador is the first country in history to include in its constitution the rights of Pachamama, which to the indigenous people of South America denotes the Earth-time Mother, the cosmos, the sustainer of life, a particularly rich and deep concept of Mother Earth. Alberto Acosta, Ecuador's former energy minister, was the president of the 2008 assembly that produced the new constitution, which he calls a toolbox to help Ecuador's people build a new economy, a new world. He's an economist.
Humans must be in harmony with other people, with individuals and communities, and all must live in harmony with nature. We also have to understand that there is another type of economy. The extractivist capitalist economy is a necroeconomy, an economy of death. We have to understand that there is an economy of life, a living economy, and this is what we should work toward.
Natalia Green of the Pachamama Foundation was one of Acosta's closest associates.
This whole idea started up with a process of asking the assembly members, what's the country you dream of? And that country was a country where life was respected in all its forms, where people were respected in all its forms, and we needed a different model of development away from a socialist model or a capitalist model, a model based on Ecuador. And that model is what we call well-being, buen vivir, or good living, or summa causa in Quechua.
Buen vivir, literally living well, is also a core value in neighboring Bolivia. Pablo Solon is a long-time social and environmental activist who served as Bolivia's ambassador to the United Nations after the election of the Evo Morales government in 2006.
Buen vivir is a concept that comes from indigenous people in the Andean region. It means to live in harmony between humans and in harmony with nature in a community. The principle of Buen Vivir is you don't want to be better than the other. You just want to live well, have enough to solve problems of health, of education, of food, but not try to accumulate and have more and more. Because if you try to have more and more, you're going to end exploiting your neighbor and exploiting nature.
Perhaps it's the philosophy of Buen Vivir that led Bolivia to call itself a plurinational state, comfortable with human diversity as well as biodiversity.
In Bolivia there are different indigenous peoples, nations. Aymaras, Quechuas, Guaranis, Mojeños, and they wanted to be recognized as nations. So when the Constitution was being written, many said, oh no, if you recognize as nations, that means you're going to split the country in tiny states. And I think the Constitution was a challenge, because then the agreement was, no, this is going to be a plurinational state, so one state that recognizes different nations.
Pablo Solon helped organize the World People's Conference on Climate Change, held in Bolivia in 2010. He was a co-author of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which was created and released at that conference. Among his co-authors was Cormac Cullinan, a South African lawyer, the author of a pioneering book called Wild Law.
For me, wildness is the juice that drives the universe. And I was saying, imagine if we had a legal system, we had laws that facilitated the flow of the fundamental juices, creative juices that run the universe. If we had a legal system specifically designed to enable us to participate and to contribute to the health and integrity of the whole. If our technologies were driven not just by the desire for profit, but the desire to contribute to the beauty, integrity and health of the whole community, not just the human community, wouldn't that be incredible?
Alberto Acosta, Natty Green, Pablo Solon and Cormac Cullinan all belong to the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, whose meetings in Ecuador ended with the first ever International Tribunal for the Rights of Nature. That tribunal heard 9 charges of alleged violations of the Universal Declaration. The cases included climate change, the Chevron Toxico case, open pit mining, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, genetically modified organisms, and hydraulic fracturing. That first tribunal was chaired by Vandana Shiva and included judges from 7 nations. It was followed by a second tribunal in Lima and a third at the Paris climate change talks. The tribunal can't make binding rulings. Its only authority is moral and ethical. Like the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Nature, it's an expression of responsible citizenship at a global level. But it's an acorn. That's how oak trees start.
If one looks at an analogous document of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that also wasn't a legally binding document, but it shifted the norms of acceptable behavior in society in a way that's been quite extraordinary. And it's now completely accepted. If a government is criticized or an organization is criticized on the basis that they're violating human rights, it really means something in the world.
For Cormac Cullinan, change begins in our conversations about it. That's where the battle against apartheid in his native South Africa really took root.
The mere fact of having the conversation is incredibly subversive to the existing system. As soon as people start talking about a different future, the old starts being whittled away. It's like a strange attractor or a vortex. The dream pulls the action towards it.
Meanwhile, the conflicts aren't going away, and if they aren't settled in the legislatures or the courts, they'll be settled in the streets.
Tell me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Tell me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Tell me what democracy.
In 2013, around Elsipogtog, New Brunswick, an apparently irresistible force met a genuinely immovable object. The force was the combined will of industry, government, and the police. The immovable object was a defiant alliance of indigenous people with French and English settlers. And here again, the issue was fracking. The provincial government of David Alward granted a 2.5 million acre natural gas lease to SWN Resources Canada, or SWN. SWN was a subsidiary of a Texas oil company.
What we got as a consultation was basically, it wasn't consultation, it was verbal abuse. SWN arrived in our little community here and told us that the government had essentially given them our land, that they could come on our land and put gas wells there or whatever they wanted, and the only choice we had in the matter was whether or not we would take the pittance that they were going to offer us for the surface rights. And so here you were, this lovely, perfectly charming man is coming in, well, it's our land now and we'll do what we want with it. And we got left there, picked up our pickets and said, oh no, you won't either.
SWN was targeting my house directly. Their map for the exploration went right in front of my house. So they were literally after my own water. So besides all of the other things, the fact that I am a human and ecosystem rights activist, Aboriginal person, woman who walks a traditional pathway, I'm also the homeowner whose property is threatened.
What happened every time we met, the thumper trucks came out, people would go, they would stand in the highway. The first time we went out, there were more than 300 people. And eventually the police said, you know, if you don't get off the highway, you will be arrested. And people then decided whether or not they were going to be arrested that day.
Not only was this a very complex alliance, but it was an alliance that had sought out a lot of different attempts to avoid conflict rather than engage in conflict. And I don't think that's what was being reported.
The first time we saw this phalanx of cops arrive, we started to laugh because it was little old ladies like me, mostly elderly, because who else is out in the middle of the day? They, you know, most people work. So, I mean, when we saw this sort of mass of officers, we thought, well, you know, these people have lost their minds. You know, it's like...
I noticed at one point there's 5 policemen all around me. I'm by myself. Like I weigh 105 pounds, eh? I was carrying a drum, I was praying. It only struck me at that moment, they were about to arrest me. I had no idea.
Then came Aboriginal Day, June 21st.
That day, they decided that they were only arresting First Nations people. And they literally dragged white people off the road so they wouldn't have to arrest them. When that happened, I thought, my gosh, this, you know, the laws of Canada don't apply here.
And this one old lady does the same thing. Goes in front of the thumper trucks and sits down, and next thing you know, they grab her and then, bam, they punch her. Whoa, okay, that was it. There was this one RCMP in front of me, I just threw him away. And I ran over there and there was these RCMPs that were still fighting with her, and I flipped.
Jason Augustine was the first Mi'kmaq warrior to be arrested. But the fight intensified. Supported by the RCMP and the Alward government, SWN pushed forward with its testing and the community pushed back. In late June, a SWN drilling truck went up in flames. At the end of July, a convoy of thumper trucks emerging from the woods was ambushed and blocked by protesters.
And then we all stood in a line and we all started singing and we all just stood there and all of a sudden I just said, I'm going to have to do something. So they just helped me. I got up, walked towards the truck, climbed up, and they pushed me up. And they just passed me the chains and the padlock, and I just ended up tying myself to the truck.
The United Front of Natives, Acadians, and Anglophones faced down the police, went to jail, dove in front of trucks. They had one clear message: you will frack in New Brunswick literally over our dead bodies. Did they have an alternative?
I would say no, personally. I think that most of New Brunswick that was choosing to be, at those protests had been painted absolutely into a corner by a non-responsive provincial government and a non-responsive Indian Act government as well. So the recourse towards, the democratic recourse, the pleas to government, those were falling on deaf ears.
On October 17th, hundreds of Mounties surrounded a sleeping encampment of protesters who were blocking a convoy of SWN trucks. The Mounties had dogs, snipers, aircraft, and riot gear. Their guns were drawn. When the smoke cleared, literally, the trucks were gone, the jails were full, and several police cruisers were on fire. Romeo Martin, who had formed an Acadian branch of the Mi'kmaq Warrior Society, got there late.
I only got there after the raid. When I got there, I could still smell the gunpowder. I could still smell the gunpowder, and all my friend was gone. And I thought everybody was dead.
And then the people won. New protesters arrived from across the country. When SWIN tried to continue seismic testing, its equipment was smashed and burned. Eventually, SWIN gave up and left. The behavior of the RCMP is currently being reviewed, but some activists, notably Annie Claire, are still facing charges. The Alward government was trounced in the ensuing election, which produced Eastern Canada's first Green Party MLA. Brian Gallant's new government announced a moratorium with 5 requirements for any resumption of fracking, including a social license and proper consultations with First Nations. But
the moratorium could easily be over in a year, and same with all those other victories. I mean, they're victories for the moment.
in search of a permanent solution, the citizens went to court. The people's advocate in 2 adventurous lawsuits is Saskatchewan environmental and human rights lawyer Larry Kowalchuk. The first suit, launched by Jim Emberger's group, the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance, contends that the scientific evidence shows that fracking is so dangerous that it violates the constitutional right of New Brunswickers to life, liberty, and security of the person. So fracking should be banned completely and permanently.
We're hoping the lawsuit, the difference between the two is that when that gets signed on the dotted line, if we win that one, that's something you can hold on to. It'll be, okay, this is something we've actually accomplished that's going to outlive our movement.
A second suit, the People's Lawsuit, is largely driven by Aboriginal plaintiffs and names SWIN as well as the provincial and federal governments. It argues that the company and the 2 governments have attacked their rights to freedom of speech and assembly and have used police and malicious lawsuits to suppress and silence them. It also contends that the governments have unlawfully permitted SWIN to develop shale gas and ignore environmental protection laws. Unlawfully.
The lawsuit says that based on the fact that this land was never ceded, I mean, there's a peace and friendship treaty, but that was to work in harmony with each other. It didn't surrender any land or rights to the Crown. And because of that, you can't come into this territory and do things without our consent. You're supposed to live sustainably with each other, the land, the animals, the water, the air, in a way that's respectful.
These 2 suits contain the seeds of fundamental legal changes that would apply to the whole country. If they succeed, all Canadians will have environmental rights. In Peru, in 2008, the Peruvian government signed a free trade agreement with the United States and then passed a set of decrees opening the Amazon region for oil development without consulting the Awahun and Wambis peoples. For those peoples, as for Indigenous people everywhere, a threat to Pachamama was a threat to their own existence. Santiago Manuel Valera, a deeply religious man, considers himself a voice for the Awahun people.
For an indigenous person from the Amazon, the image of nature is one that is integral to humans. We are not separate entities. We need nature to live, to develop as people. Nature assures that humans achieve a balance in accordance with their needs so that they can achieve buen vivir. The Awajún people are rooted in these values. Therefore, with this crisis, we had to defend our livelihood and our land. Because nature supports us, we have to defend nature. It is our source of survival.
A full year of united and vocal opposition culminated in 65 days of civil disobedience, including a 2-week blockade of Peru's main east-west highway by about 5,000 people. On June 5, 2009, the army was ordered to assist the police in clearing the road. After 2 days of bloody clashes, 32 police and 41 natives were dead, and more than 150 native people were wounded. One was Santiago Manuin, who had been shot 8 times.
The government wanted to teach us a lesson, but they did so without considering our history. The Jibaro group of Awajún people are descendants of warriors who cut off heads. The government forces surrounded us, and we had to fight back. My religious education taught me that you must defend life. You don't sell the forest, you protect it. The Awajún have to defend their lives to ensure the rights of future generations.
The Bagua massacre was among the cases brought before the International Tribunal for the Rights of Nature, and rightly so. That tragedy shows our need for universal rights and global courts to deal with the crimes and injustices generated by the global economy. And in concert with that, I believe, we're seeing the emergence of a factor that's beautiful and profound, rooted in fundamental human experience and inalienable human rights. We're seeing the birth of global citizenship.
There's a concept, again, in Anishinaabemowin called Minopamatazuin, which is an aspiration to live well in the world, and that is a legal principle, Minopamatazuin. And it's not formed by just one singular set of teachings, but it's trying to understand the triangulated, intersecting relationship of traditions.
An aspiration to live well in the world. Buen vivir in Canada. This is Dr. John Burrows, who teaches law at the University of Victoria, but who is also rooted in the very different legal traditions of his Anishinaabeg heritage. Canada doesn't call itself a plurinational state, but I think it should, and it has 3 distinct legal traditions: French civil law, English common law, and the legal practices of the indigenous peoples. Which leads me to ask the fundamental question, what is law?
I think of law as something that's authoritative, something that provides guidance for people in their lives. It's a set of standards or principles or criteria that people look to in making decisions and also regulating their everyday behaviors.
But common law and indigenous law ultimately spring from very different sources.
It's where you look for your authority that makes a big difference in terms of what you regard as being directive or guiding in your life. So if you see the Crown as the source of all information, as the source of all authority, you have a view about what the decision-making criteria would be, what the responsibilities might be around regulation. But if you see the Creator or the trees or the waters or the animals or people's own living interactions as being the source of authority, the criteria, the precedent, then you would obviously have another view of where you should look to find law.
This is really fundamental. If the world in effect belongs originally to the Crown and is then conveyed to individual people, then the earth becomes property, completely subject to human whim. But if the world is a gift from the Creator, then it's inherently sacred. It has to be treated with respect. And when we talk about the human right to a healthy environment and the inherent rights of Pachamama, we're saying exactly the same thing.
There's a term in Anishinaabemowin called Nindinwe Maganidok, which is all our relations. And whenever we create law and participate in law, It's a holistic thing, and it's not just Anishinaabe people with Anishinaabe people or Anishinaabe people with other indigenous peoples or the rocks or the trees or the plants and the animals. It's those that live amongst us who are from many nations in the world.
It's like listening to understand instead of listening to respond, because I think that the forest doesn't really care what you say to it necessarily, but if you really understand, then you are going to change your life and how you live, and then you can live in harmony.
The validity of the treaties, Aboriginal rights, and Aboriginal title were all affirmed in Canada's 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which means that Aboriginal law is an integral part of the laws of Canada. Indeed, my right to be here derives from the treaties of peace and friendship negotiated between the First Nations and the first settlers.
When my great-great-grandfather signed a treaty dealing with 1.5 million acres of land that we're sitting on here, it was an agreement that was made in accordance with how he viewed the world. And what he did is he invited the Crown and the people who were represented by the Crown to come and live in accordance with a set of relationships that tries to advance this idea of minibumatusin, or respect. And so the right of people to live in this territory stems from the invitations like my grandfather and great-great-grandfather and others made, which is we will live together in peace and friendship and respect.
Building birch bark canoes is a long tradition in Todd Labrador's family, a skill rooted in a deep understanding of natural harmony.
My great-grandfather, he always told us, he said, if you walk in the forest, you see all the different trees, the hemlock, maple, birch. He said they're all living together, but they're different. But under the ground, if you could see beneath the surface of the ground, you'll see that they're all holding hands. They're all supporting each other. And he said, we as human beings need to do the same thing. Regardless of color of skin or race or religion, we need to do what Mother Nature is speaking to us all the time, telling us these things. Our ancestors knew that.
Buen Vivir. This wampum band is the indigenous record of the first of the treaties, concluded in 1613 between the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee nations. This is the model for all the hundreds of treaties that followed. The top white band represents peace. The middle one represents friendship. The third one represents respect. One of the purple bands represents the indigenous peoples, and the other represents the Europeans. The wampum belt says the two peoples are brothers, sailing the river of life side by side as equals, neither dominating over the other. They promise to do this together, for as long as the grass is green, the water flows downhill, and the sun rises in the east. If you were looking for a vivid, poetic image of a plurinational society respectful of Pachamama, you could hardly do better than this. This is where we need to go, traveling through our lives together in fellowship with one another and with all of creation, traveling with reverence, joy, and gratitude. Thank you. Merci bien. Walala.